Dear students, hope you are all well. So, today we will begin with a chapter in geography. The name of the chapter is Tides. Let's move forward. Observe the pictures given here on the slide. Do the above photographs show the same place or different places? So, the photographs here show the same place. Both the pictures are showing you the same place. Observe and note the spread of water seen in both the photographs. We can note that the sea water is very close to the coast in one picture, and in the other picture, you find that the sea water is far away from the coast. So, it's a natural event. So, the places you can see the water that is close to the coast is when it is high tide, and the places where you see the water is away from the coast, that is low tide. Tides are movements of sea water occurring daily and regularly. The level of sea water changes after the specific period of time. That is, after every 12 hours and 25 minutes, a cycle of high tide and low tide gets completed. Okay, let's move forward. Next is forces that influence the tides. Here we have two important forces to learn, that is, the centrifugal force and the gravitational force. So, tides are the periodic rise and fall of surface water caused by the gravitational force of the moon and the sun and by the rotation of the earth. The movements of the solar system that influence the tides are predictable. Therefore, changes in tides, that is the height and time, are also predictable. Let's move forward. The next is, let us now compare high tide and low tide. High tide, we learned, is a rise in sea water level, and low tide is a fall in the sea water level. At the time of high tide, we saw that the sea water is very close to the coast, and at the time of low tide, the sea water is far away from the coast. Now, the science behind the tide is the regularly occurring events of high tide and low tide appear to be quite simple and natural. However, tides are directly related to the sun, the moon, and the earth, and also the gravitational and centrifugal forces that interact between them. Let's move forward. Now, observe this picture and try this. Keep a small stone or a chalk piece on your notebook and move the notebook from left to right with some force. Let's move forward. The next activity is fill the mixer jar with water and switch on the mixer. Observe what happens. Do it only with the supervision of your parents. You can also observe a fan and a slide shot while they are moving. Let's move forward. The next activity is take half glass of water. Slowly move the glass in one direction in a circular fashion and observe what happens to the water. The next activity is observe what happens if you whirl a key ring around a finger. Let's move forward. Now next is let's learn what is centrifugal and gravitational force. Now just now we saw all the different activities. We observed those activities. In which direction did the piece of chalk fall? Where did the water in the glass show a bulge? What effect did the movement have on the things attached to the keyring? And what happened to the water in the container and the mixer? Which forces could be operating in activities listed above? So, here it is these two main forces that we are going to learn, that is the centrifugal force and the gravitational force. So the power or force the earth gets due to its rotation is called the centrifugal force. And this force works away from the center of the earth. Can you see the arrows in the picture? That it works away from the center of the earth. That is the centrifugal force. Whereas, due to the centrifugal force, any object on the earth would be thrown into the space. If there would be only centrifugal force, then any object on the earth would be thrown into space. But, however, the gravitational force is working towards the center of the earth at the same time. So, we have the gravitational force also working at the same time. At the same time, and due to gravitational force, any object on the surface of the earth remains at the place where it exists. Let's move forward. Next is the centrifugal force acts in the direction opposite to the gravitational force. And centrifugal force means going away from the center. You must have experienced this at the local fairs. When you go to the fairs, you must have experienced this. If you have used a Ferris wheel, if you have sat in a Ferris wheel, the seat spins. Can you see in the picture? The seat spins and leans outwards, away from the wheel. This also is the effect of which force? The centrifugal force. Okay, let's move forward. Now here you can see how the students are divided into two equal teams to conduct a game of tug of war. And again, they will be also experiencing the same forces, that is the centrifugal force and the gravitational force. Let's move forward. Next is tides. The following factors are responsible for the occurrence of tides. The first one is the gravitational pull of the moon, the sun, as well as that of the earth. Secondly, revolution of the earth around the sun and the indirect revolution of the moon around the sun. Then the next is centrifugal force generated due to the rotation of the earth. So these are all the factors responsible for the occurrence of tides. Let's move forward. Now let's look at these pictures. The moon is closer to the earth as you can see in the first picture. Okay. Then the sun. The sun is little far. Hence, its gravitational force becomes more effective than that of the sun. Now, tides occur due to the relative position of the moon, the sun, and the earth. A place on the earth located at the opposite point of the place experiencing high or low tide also experiences high or low tide, respectively, at the same time. This is a result of the centrifugal force. Let's move forward. Now, here's this diagram or picture tells you about the low tide and the high tide. And we can see how the combined gravitational pull of the sun and the moon creates high tide and low tide. A place on the earth located on the opposite point of the place experiencing high tide or low tide also experiences high tide or low tide respectively at the same place. So when there is high tide at 0 degree meridian, now you know what is 0 degree meridian? That is a prime meridian. Now 0 degree meridian, so when there is a high tide at 0 degree meridian and 180 degree meridian also experiences high tide. Now 0 degree meridian is opposite to 180 degree meridian. So 0 degree meridian will also experience high tide and the opposite side, that is the 180 degree meridian, will also experience high tide. So you see the opposite sides experiencing high tides and the opposite sides of the earth you can see the bulge coming out. Bulge means lots of water coming out, and that is the water of the ocean. So, if there is a high tide at 0 degree meridian and 180-degree meridian, then low tide will also occur in the perpendicular form, and that will be at 90 degrees east and 90 degrees west. So, where you will experience high tide is 0 degree meridian. Okay, that is the north and south direction, 0 degree meridian and 180 degree meridian. So, both the opposite sides will experience high tide. And where will you get experience low tide? That is 90 degree east and 90 degree west, as you can see in the picture. Okay, you will experience there low tide. Let's move forward. Here you can once again see the occurrence of tides, and you can see two different lines, right? When one is the red color and one is the white color. So the red line shows you the gravitational force of the moon and the earth. And the white line is about the centrifugal force. That is the force that works away from the center. And gravitational force is working towards the center of the earth at the same time. So both the forces works at the same time. So here you can see how high tides occur in both the opposite side. That is 0 degree and 180 degree meridian, whereas the sides perpendicular to the 0 degree and 180 degree meridian is the 90 degree meridian, and both the opposite sides 90 degree north as well as 90 degree south is at present experiencing low tides. Okay, let's move forward. Next is types of tides. As the timing of the tides varies every day, the range of a tide also keeps on changing. Generally, the highest high tides occur on full moon and new moon days. Okay, on these days, the highest high tides occur. That is the full moon and new moon days. Whereas on the days of the first and the third quarter, the high tide is at its minimum. So we are learning here two types of tides, and that is spring tide and neap tide. So this particular figure which you are seeing right now is talking to you about the spring tide. Now how does the spring tide occur on a new moon and full moon days? That is because of the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon act in the same direction. Due to its total pull increases to its maximum, and hence the tides on these days is much higher than the average high tide. So it goes to the maximum. Can you see the level there? It's very high. So when it goes to the maximum, you can see the level of high tide. There it is known as the spring tide. Okay, then it is called as the spring tide. Spring tide, as the bulge of the high tide is greater, the water at low tide recedes. That means it becomes less, much more. So the water level during spring tide is higher than the average high tides. Okay, it's higher than the average high tides and lower than the average low tides. Let's move forward. Now let's learn the second type of tide, that is the neap tide. Again, while revolving around the earth, the moon makes a right angle. Can you see in the picture? The moon is not in a straight line. It's making a right angle with respect to the earth and the sun twice a month. This position occurs on the first and the third quarter of each month. On both these days, the forces of both the sun and the moon operates at right angles on the earth. You can see the figure. The moon and the earth is at the right angle. At the places where the sun causes high tide, the gravitational pull of the moon, which is at right angle, also acts on the sea water. Due to such conditions, the water level rise is less than the usual at the time of high tide. And similarly, fall in water level is less than usual at the time of low tide. You can see the level of the water here. Can you see the level of the water? It is low compared to the level of the water in the spring tide. In the spring tide, the level was high, but in the neap tide, the level is low. This is because of the attraction of the sun and the moon are not complementary. They are making a right angle, right? But at the right angles to each other, and such tides are called as neap tides. Neap tides are little lower than the average high tides and a little higher than the average low tides. So in neap tides, the high tides are little lower, whereas the low tides are little higher. Okay, let's move forward. Next is difference between spring tide and neap tide. Spring tides occurs twice a month, that is on a new moon and full moon days, whereas neap tides occur during the first and the third quarter of the moon. In spring tides, the position of the sun, earth, and the moon are in a straight line, whereas in neap tides, the sun, earth, and the moon form a 90-degree angle. Spring tides have a large tidal range, while neap tides have small tidal range. Let's move forward. The next is let's revise what we have done today. So, we learnt in the beginning tides and we also learnt what is high tide and what is low tide and the difference between the tides. So, sometimes when the sea water is very close to the coast and the other time it is far away from the coast. So, when it is very close to the coast, it is high tide, and when it is far away, it is low tide. Then we learned two main forces, which is the gravitational and the centrifugal force. After that, we learned the factors responsible for the occurrence of tides. That is, the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun, as well as that of the earth. The revolution of the earth around the sun and the indirect revolution of the moon around the sun. Centrifugal force generated due to the rotation of the earth. Then the next we learnt the types of tides. And the types of tides were spring tide and neap tide. So spring tide we learnt occurs on the new moon and the full moon day, and the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon act in the same direction, leading to spring tides. Spring tides are higher than the average high tides and lower than the average low tides. And neap tides we learned happens mainly on the first and the third quarter of each month. The forces of both the sun and the moon, they operate at right angles on the earth, leading to neap tides. Neap tides are little lower than the average high tides and little higher than the average low tides. Let's move forward. That's your homework. The first question is, tides are movements of sea water occurring dash and dash. Second question is, dash force means going away from the center. The third one is, what are the two main types of tides? And the last one is, on which day do the neap tides occur? That's all for now. We will learn the next part of the lesson in the next video. Thank you for listening, children. Goodbye. Take care.